Change is one of the most uncomfortable experiences of life. It shakes routines, challenges expectations, and often forces us to let go of what feels safe. Yet again and again, Scripture reminds us that God does His greatest work not in comfort, but in transition. When doors close, when seasons shift, when familiar ground disappears beneath our feet, it is not a sign that God has left, that it is often proof that He has arrived in a new way. Fear whispers that change means loss, failure, or chaos. Faith declares that change is movement, growth, and divine alignment. God does not waste seasons. He does not allow disruption without purpose. Every shift you are facing right now, whether in relationships, finances, health, calling, or identity, is being used by God to shape you, prepare you, and position you for what is next. Change never shows up in your life without purpose. What feels sudden to you has already been scheduled in heaven. God does not wake up surprised by your circumstances, and He does not allow disruption unless it carries divine intention. When a season shifts, it is not because something went wrong. It is because something is being worked out. Change is not punishment, it is positioning. Many people fear change because they interpret it as loss, but God sees it as instruction. Every transition carries an assignment tied to your growth. God uses change to teach lessons that comfort could never explain. He assigns change when remaining the same would limit who you are becoming. If you stayed where you were, you would stay at the level you were, and God loves you too much to leave you undeveloped. Change forces you to confront habits, mindsets, and dependencies that have grown too comfortable. It exposes areas where you relied more on familiarity than on faith. God assigns change to interrupt cycles that no longer serve His purpose in your life. What feels like disruption is often divine correction. God redirecting your steps before you drift too far from your calling. When God assigns change, He also assigns grace. You are not stepping into the unknown alone. You are walking into territory God has already occupied. The fear you feel is not proof that the change is wrong. It is proof that the assignment is stretching you beyond your comfort zone. Growth always feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. God assigns change to activate what has been dormant inside you. Strength, wisdom, patience, and faith are developed in motion, not stagnation. If everything remained predictable, you would never discover how much you can endure, how deeply you can trust, or how powerfully God can sustain you. Change calls you to rise, to mature, and to walk with greater spiritual awareness. Even when change is initiated by loss, disappointment, or unanswered prayers, it still carries purpose. God can turn forced change into intentional growth. What others meant to end you, God can use to expand you. The assignment may not look holy, but its outcome will be. So when change arrives uninvited, do not immediately resist. Ask what God is building through it. Ask what He is removing, what He is revealing, and what He is preparing you for. Change is not chaos. It is God giving you a new assignment that aligns with your next level. And fear does not begin with the situation. It begins with the struggle for control. When life starts to change, our first instinct is often to hold tighter, plan harder, and demand clarity before we move forward. But fear grows strongest when we try to manage outcomes that were never meant to be in our hands. God never asked you to control the future. He asked you to trust Him with it. Control creates the illusion of safety, but it quietly steals peace. The more you try to predict every step, the heavier the burden becomes. Fear enters when you believe everything depends on you, your decisions, your strength, your timing. Yet God is not looking for you to carry the weight of what He already governs. What He manages, He sustains. What you try to manage alone, you fear losing. Fear often disguises itself as responsibility, wisdom, or caution. But there is a difference between being diligent and being distrustful. When your planning replaces prayer and your strategies replace surrender, anxiety is the result. God allows moments of uncertainty to remind you that your security was never rooted in control, but in His sovereignty. When God is at work, He will often remove your ability to control outcomes. Doors close without an explanation. Timelines shift without warning. People change without permission. These moments expose where your trust truly lies. Fear arises when you realize you cannot force what only God can fulfill. But this realization is not meant to paralyze you. It is meant to free you. Letting go of control does not mean giving up. It means giving over. It means choosing faith over obsession and peace over pressure. God does not reveal every detail because he wants relationship, not independence. He wants you to walk with him, not ahead of him. Trust is built when you step forward without guarantees, believing God will meet you there. Fear fades when surrender becomes your posture, when you accept that God sees what you cannot, knows what you do now, and controls you fear most. Your heart begins to rest. Control asks, what if it fails? Faith asks, what if God is already working it out? The moment you release control, you make room for divine intervention. God can do more with your surrender than you can do with your stress. Fear loses its power when you stop trying to manage what God has already promised to handle. God understands that growth is deeply connected to environment. When the surroundings remain the same, the heart often stays the same. That is why God will sometimes change what is around you before he changes what is within you. A new season, a new place, new people, or new pressures are not random disruptions. They are divine tools designed to shape who you are becoming. Many prayers ask God to change circumstances while allowing us to remain comfortable, but comfort rarely produces transformation. God knows that certain mindsets, habits, and limitations cannot be broken in familiar settings. So he alters the environment to challenge your thinking, stretch your faith, and expose areas that need refinement. What feels uncomfortable is often necessary. When God shifts your environment, he removes the support systems you leaned on too heavily. Not to abandon you, but to teach you dependence on him. Familiar environments can create false confidence, where success is based on routine instead of faith. A new environment demands prayer, humility, and spiritual awareness. It forces you to listen more closely to God's voice. Environmental change also reveals what is truly inside you. Pressure does not create character, it reveals it. When surroundings change, patience, endurance, fear, faith, and obedience rise to the surface. God uses these moments to purify motives and strengthen spiritual muscles that would otherwise remain weak. God may change your environment to break limitations placed on you by others or by yourself. Labels, expectations, and past identities often lose their power in new spaces. What people refuse to see in one place may be celebrated in another. God moves you so you can see yourself through his eyes, not through the lens of your past. Even when the environment changes suddenly or painfully, God remains intentional. He is not uprooting you to harm you. He is transplanting you to help you grow. A plant that never leaves the pot will never reach its full height. Growth requires room, sunlight, and sometimes pruning. So when God alters your surroundings, do not immediately resist it. Recognize that he may be protecting your future by disrupting your present. The change around you is often the pathway to the change within you. Loss is one of the hardest forms of change to accept because it feels final, painful, and unfair. When something is taken away, a relationship, an opportunity, a position, a season, you naturally grieve what once was. But in God's hands, loss is not always subtraction. Sometimes it is preparation. What feels like God removing something from your life may actually be him creating space for something greater. God never removes without reason. He sees what you cannot see, the limits of what you are holding on to, and the weight it places on your future. Some things that once served you well become obstacles when you step into a new season. God knows that you cannot receive what is next if your hands are still full of what belongs to the past. Loss clears the way for alignment. Many losses feel confusing because they happen before the replacement is visible. God often removes first and reveals later. This requires trust because the gap between loss and fulfillment can feel empty and unsettling, yet this space is intentional. It is where God heals your heart, reshapes your expectations, and redefines your dependence on Him rather than on what was taken. Sometimes God removes people not because they are bad, but because they're no longer assigned to your next chapter. Every relationship has a season, and holding on to expired connections can delay growth. God makes room by separating you from what cannot go where He is taking you. Separation is painful, but stagnation is worse. Loss can also remove false identities. You may lose a title, a role, or a sense of security that defined you more than your faith did. God allows these losses so your identity can be rooted in Him, not in what you possess or produce. When those things are stripped away, what remains is what truly matters. What feels like an ending is often a clearing. God is not emptying your life to leave you barren. He is preparing the ground for something new to take root. Even when you don't yet see what is coming, trust that God knows exactly how much room is needed for what He plans to bring. When God moves you out of a season, it is easy to assume you were pushed aside or left behind. Transition often feels like rejection because it disrupts what was familiar and secure. But in God's design, transition is rarely a demotion. It is more often preparation for promotion. God removes you from one level because He is getting ready to trust you with another. Before God elevates someone, He usually separates them. Separation is not isolation for punishment. It is focus for preparation. New responsibility requires new perspective, new discipline, and deeper character. God will often pull you away from distractions, familiar affirmations, and comfortable patterns so He can refine your heart for what is next. Promotion in God's kingdom not always look like immediate success or recognition. It often looks like uncertainty, waiting, and hidden growth. God develops leaders in private before He reveals them in public. The season where no one sees you may be the season where God is building the strength you will need when everyone does. Transition tests your obedience. Will you trust God when the path is unclear? Will you continue to serve when the rewards are delayed? These moments reveal whether your faith is rooted in God's calling or in external validation. Promotion requires humility, and transition strips away pride. God also transitions you to stretch your capacity. What you handled in the last season may not prepare you for the demands of the next. New levels require deeper faith, sharper discernment, and greater dependence on God. Transition builds that capacity through pressure and unfamiliarity. If God were rejecting you, He would leave you where you are. The very fact that things are shifting is evidence that He is still involved, still invested, and still shaping your future. Transition means God is not finished with you. He is advancing you, even if the process feels uncomfortable. Faith is not believing when everything is clear. Faith is trusting God when nothing is certain. It is easy to say you trust God when the plan makes sense and the path is visible, but real faith is revealed in moments when the outcome is hidden, the timing is unclear, and the next step feels risky. God often withholds full clarity because He wants your heart anchored in Him, not in results. When outcomes are hidden, fear tries to fill the gap with worst-case scenarios. Asking mind races, what-if questions, imagine failure, loss, or disappointment. Faith interrupts the cycle by choosing trust over imagination. It says, I don't know how this will turn out, but I know who is leading me. Faith does not deny uncertainty. It refuses to be ruled by it. God designs faith to be relational, not information. If He revealed every detail, you would rely on the plan instead of the planner. Hidden outcomes force you to pray, listen, and lean into God's presence. They create daily dependence, where each step is guided by obedience rather than assurance. This kind of faith deepens intimacy with God. Choosing trust while the outcome is hidden requires courage. It means moving forward without guarantees, serving without applause, and believing without evidence. Yet this is where faith grows strongest. Muscles grow under resistance, and faith grows under uncertainty. Every unseen outcome is an opportunity for your trust to mature. Hidden outcomes also protect you. If you knew everything ahead of time, you might rush, retreat, or rely on your own strength. God shields you from what you are not yet ready to carry. He reveals just enough to keep you moving while shaping your character along the way. Faith does not demand to see the end before it begins. It steps forward knowing that God sees what you cannot and is already present in the future you are walking toward. Trusting God in the hidden places is not weakness. It is spiritual strength in its purest form. One of the most difficult parts of change is when God seems quiet. You pray, you wait, you listen, and heaven feels silent. In these moments, it is easy to assume that God has stepped back or withdrawn his presence. But silence is not abandonment. God's quiet seasons are often the moments when he is working most deeply beneath the surface. God's silence does not mean he is indifferent. A teacher is often silent during a test, not because they don't care, but because the lesson is being applied. In the same way, God may be silent because he has already given instruction and now he is watching your faith in action. Silence is not the absence of guidance. It is the space where obedience is proven. During seasons of change, God may quiet external reassurance so you learn to recognize his internal peace. When voices, confirmations, and signs become fewer, your sensitivity to God's presence grows stronger. You learn to walk by faith instead of feelings, by conviction instead of constant affirmation. Silence also builds spiritual maturity. Constant answers can create dependency, but quiet seasons develop endurance. God is teaching you to trust his character, not chase his voice. You begin to rely on what you know about God rather than what you hear from him in the moment. Often, God is silent because he is aligning details you cannot see. While you wait, he is arranging people, timing, and circumstances. Heaven moves in precision, not haste. What feels like delay is actually divine coordination. God's silence invites deeper prayer, not louder panic. It calls you to remain faithful even when reassurance is absent. The silence is not empty. It is full of unseen work, quiet protection, and purposeful preparation. Comfort can quietly become a substitute for faith. When life feels predictable and familiar, it is easy to rely on routines, habits, and stability instead of relying fully on God. God understands this danger, which is why he often allows change to disrupt comfort, not to harm you, but realign your trust. Change shakes what you lean on so you remember who truly sustains you. Comfort creates a false sense of security. You begin to believe that because things are stable, they are guaranteed. But faith was never meant to rest on circumstances. God uses change to remind you that your peace is not found in what stays the same, but in who stays faithful. When comfort is removed, dependence is revealed. God breaks comfort to awaken courage. Growth requires movement, and comfort resists movement. When everything feels safe, there is little motivation to stretch, risk, or trust God beyond what you already know. Change forces you out of spiritual autopilot and into intentional faith. In comfortable seasons, prayer can become casual and expectation can become small. Change revives hunger for God's presence. It drives you back to prayer, back to scripture, back to seeking direction instead of assuming it. What comfort numbs, change sharpens. God also breaks comfort to expand capacity. You cannot handle greater responsibility while clinging to lesser security. Change builds resilience, adaptability, and spiritual endurance. It teaches you that God is sufficient even when familiar support systems fall away. When comfort is broken, you discover that God himself is enough. What once felt like stability is replaced by deeper trust. Change exposes the truth that comfort was never the source of your strength. God was. Resistance often feels like strength, but in reality, it is rooted in fear. When change arrives, the natural response is to fight it, question it, or wish it away. Yet resisting what God allows only prolongs discomfort. God's process moves forward whether you cooperate or not, but acceptance determines how much peace you experience along the way. Resistance drains energy. It keeps your heart locked in frustration, replaying what used to be instead of embracing what is becoming. When you resist, you spend more time grieving the past than preparing for the future. God does not force acceptance, but He invites it because acceptance unlocks clarity, wisdom, and emotional rest. Acceptance is not agreement with pain. It is alignment with purpose. You can accept a season without liking it. Acceptance simply says, I trust that God is working, even if I don't understand how. This posture opens your heart to receive instruction, correction, and strength that resistance blocks. When you accept change, you begin to see opportunities instead of obstacles. God starts revealing lessons, connections, and growth that were invisible while you were fighting the process. Acceptance sharpens spiritual vision. It turns confusion into curiosity and anxiety into expectation. Resistance often comes from wanting answers before obedience. Acceptance chooses obedience first, trusting that understanding will follow. God reveals insight to those who walk with Him, not to those who stand still demanding explanations. The moment you stop wrestling with what God has permitted, peace enters the process. Acceptance accelerates healing, growth, and transformation. It allows God to move freely in your life instead of working around your fear. One of the greatest sources of peace in seasons of change is remembering that the God who brought you this far is the same God who will carry you forward. Your past victories, answered prayers, and moments of divine intervention are not coincidences. They are evidence of His faithfulness. If He was with you before, guiding, protecting, and providing, He is not stopped. He is still working on your behalf. It is easy to forget God's consistency when life feels uncertain. Doubt whispers that because the path is unfamiliar, God might have abandoned you. But God does not operate differently in a new season. The same power, wisdom, and love that guided your steps before is still at work, orchestrating your next move. Past guidance is a promise of future provision. God's leadership is not limited to the moments of clarity and ease. Often, the greatest demonstrations of His faithfulness happen in confusion, difficulty, or isolation. He has brought you through trials before, teaching you endurance, patience, and trust. Those same lessons are being applied now. Even if you cannot see the full picture, remembering God's past faithfulness strengthens your present faith. When fear creeps in, reflect on times when He provided, protected, or redirected your life for your good. Let those memories anchor your trust today. God's character never changes, and what He has done once, He will do again. God also leads differently in every season. While His purpose is consistent, His methods adapt to your current needs. What worked for you before may not be the strategy for now, but His wisdom ensures that every new path is covered by His guidance. Even when the direction is unclear, He is still in control. Trusting God to lead you through means surrendering anxiety about the outcome. It is the decision to step forward, knowing that His hands are on the wheel. You do not need to orchestrate every detail. Your responsibility is obedience and faith, trusting that He is capable of navigating the complexities of your life. The God who's led you here has already proven His ability to sustain you, protect you, and provide for you. Let that assurance remove fear, silence, and replace anxiety with confidence. When the journey ahead seems uncertain, remind yourself, the same God who has been faithful in the past is still present, and He will not fail to see you through this season. Growth is never a process of accumulation alone. It is equally a process of release. To move forward spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, you must be willing to let go of what no longer serves God's purpose in your life. Holding on to past successes, old mindsets, toxic relationships, or outdated habits can prevent you from stepping fully into what God has prepared for you. Letting go is not loss. It is the prerequisite for expansion. Many people resist letting go because they fear the unknown. They cling to what is familiar, even when it has stopped producing fruit. But God's plan for your life often requires leaving comfort zones, predictable routines, and even relationships that hinder growth. Every time God calls you to release something, He is making room for something greater, something aligned with your destiny. Letting go is also about surrendering control. We often hold on because we believe we can manage outcomes or protect ourselves from pain. But growth requires trusting God enough to release our grasp on what we think is essential. What we cling to tightly may actually be holding us back from God's best. A spiritual growth, in particular, requires letting go of old ways of thinking. God uses change to shift our perspective, challenge our assumptions, and break strongholds in our minds. Without release, old patterns continue to dictate our decisions, limiting the fullness of His purpose. Letting go opens the door for a renewed mind, clearer vision, and deeper obedience. Even in painful circumstances, God's call to release is for your benefit. Sometimes He allows situations to end or relationships to fade so you can discover independence, resilience, and reliance on Him. Letting go is an act of faith, showing that you trust God's timing and His wisdom, even when it hurts. Growth is often measured by what you are willing to leave behind. Every step forward in faith requires sacrifice, not always of possessions, but of attitudes, fears, and attachments. The more you release, the more space God has to pour in wisdom, strength, and new opportunities. Letting go is not a one-time decision, it is a continual practice. As you move through life, God will challenge you to release control, old habits, and unfruitful patterns repeatedly. Each act of release strengthens your spiritual maturity, deepens your trust, and positions you for the next level of growth. The truth is, God cannot give you what you need for tomorrow if your hands are still full of yesterday. Growth always requires letting go because God's best cannot enter a life that refuses to make space for it. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning to wait when change is slow, when prayers seem unanswered, or when progress feels stalled. It is natural to assume that God has denied your request or abandoned your dream. Yet delay does not equal denial. God's timing operates on a different clock, a clock that sees the bigger picture, aligns circumstances perfectly, and prepares you for what you cannot yet handle. Delays are often periods of preparation. God is not absent when things are postponed. He is refining you. He is shaping your character, teaching patience, increasing your faith, and positioning you so that when the breakthrough comes, you are ready to handle it with wisdom and maturity. What feels like waiting is actually working. It is important to understand that delay is not punishment. Sometimes we misinterpret timing because we are measuring it by our own desires or schedules. God measures timing by readiness. He will not release what you are not ready to receive. The wait is designed to protect you from premature opportunities, unwise decisions, or circumstances that could derail your destiny. Delays also test perseverance. In the waiting, your faith is strengthened. Patience becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a lifestyle. You learn to continue moving forward, working faithfully in the present, and trusting God without seeing immediate results. Delay teaches endurance, and endurance produces maturity and spiritual depth. During periods of delay, God is aligning details you cannot yet see. People, resources, and opportunities are being arranged behind the scenes. Often the final result is greater than what you imagined because the delay allowed God to perfect every element of the plan. Waiting is never wasted. It is the silent work of divine orchestration. Delay also filters out distractions and false expectations. While you wait, God separates what truly belongs to your future from what only feels familiar. This filtering process ensures that when your season of fulfillment comes, it is pure, purposeful, and aligned aligned with his will. The key is to remain faithful and hopeful during delays instead of doubting or giving up. Use this season to grow spiritually, strengthen your character, and prepare your heart for what God is about to release. Delay is temporary, but the lessons, wisdom, and readiness it produces last a lifetime. As we come to the end of this message, remember this: change is not the enemy. It is not a punishment, a setback, or a sign that God has forgotten you. Change is a signal that God is at work shaping you, preparing you, and positioning you for something greater than you can imagine. Every closed door, every shift, every disruption is a part of his perfect plan for your life. Do not fear what is happening. Do not let uncertainty steal your peace. God has not abandoned you. He is moving behind the scenes, aligning circumstances and orchestrating outcomes will exceed your expectations. What feels uncomfortable today is the soil in which your faith, character, and destiny are being planted. Trust him in the process. Lean on his wisdom. Surrender your need to control every detail. Step boldly even when the way forward is unclear, because the God who has guided you this far is faithful to lead you through every new season. Your past victories are proof that he is faithful. Your prayers are evidence that he hears. Your trials are reminders that he strengthens. And your present change is the doorway to a future filled with promise.